Hi guys, welcome back. Now we are going to talk about value with watercolors. Now we know if we're trying to make a color lighter or darker, we're used to mixing in white to make a tint or black to make a shade. Watercolors are different. They're actually much easier because you create value with your amounts of water. Let's do some little examples here. So I'm going to start by just doing a gradient or a little wash where I go from light to dark. So I'm going to take some water and I'm going to make a rectangle on my paper. So it's clean water, I'm just making a nice wet rectangle. Now I'm going to be using purple today for my examples. This technique that I'm showing you works for every single color. So I'm going to use purple. Let's hydrate it, get it nice and wet. Now I want to show you how you can make a gradient or kind of that ombre effect very simply. So I swirled on my pan to make the color bright and bold. It is really intense. Now I'm going to paint this across the top of my rectangle. Now it's really cool with watercolors. I love this. You can see how the color is blending out into the water. It's doing this without me doing anything, and I love watercolors, how it does that. It's just fascinating. Now, what I want to do is I want to slowly work from dark to light. With watercolors, all you got to do is add more water. So I'm not going to add any more color to this. I'm only going to be adding water as it gets farther down. So at the top, I'm going to use my brush, and I'm just going to zigzag down just a little bit. Now the water on the paper is adding more water to our color for us. It's already making it a bit lighter. Now I want to rinse my brush, and coming back to where I ended, I'm going to zigzag down a bit more. You might have to go up and down a few times to help pull it, but I'm pulling the color down and mixing in more water. Each time I go to rinse my brush, that helps create that lighter value. And we can see how it went from dark to light really easily. I love doing gradients. They're so smooth. So as we see with our gradient, we get lighter values by mixing in more water. Let's do a classic value scale to help show us this. So this side will be the darkest. This side will be the lightest. So let's start with our darkest value. I'm even going to pick up my paint to make it easier because it tends to wobble around. I want to swirl my paintbrush on this pan a lot. I want to make the pigment really bold and bright, really activate that so it's the darkest it can be. When I have that, I'm just going to paint it on. Now, I'm not going to paint all the way to the edge of my lines because I don't want my colors to bleed into each other. As we've already practiced, watercolors like to bleed into each other, that wet on wet technique, if they're next to each other. We saw how just my line of paint bled out over here. It would do the same thing here. Alright, so leaving a little space. Nice, bold purple color. Now, for the rest of these, I need to be able to mix my color first. I'm going to do it on my pan. I have a little clean spot here. First thing I want to do is I want to make a nice big pile of my paint. So I'm going to swirl a lot and then kind of dab it out onto the palette, get some more water, do it again. So I'm making a little pile of my paint. And I know this pile should be the same value as what I made over here. It is nice and bold because I'm swirling a lot. It's not a lot of water. Now, to create my values, we know I'm going to add more water. So if this pile is the same as that one, I'm just going to rinse my brush and add a little bit of water into it. Mix it all together, and this will create a slightly lighter purple. Try to leave a little space around those lines. We see how it's gotten a little bit lighter. Now I'm just going to continue this process over by mixing in a little bit of water each time.
Wet paintbrush, mix it in. Paint. Wet clean paintbrush, mix it in. And paint.
Now for the last section, I want to add a lot of water. So you see, I'm kind of pulling it from my water cup, and bringing it over. I could make way more than just 5 values, but we're just starting with 5 to keep it simple. I've mixed in a lot of water, mix it together, and paint. We see how this makes a much lighter value. Now, as I said, you could do a value scale with any color you want. The same process applies to all of it. The more water you add, the lighter it gets. And you could do an infinite number of different values. I could keep going lighter and lighter, but I like to just start with 5. Alright, so I want to show you one more way of doing the value scale by working backwards. So what if you had to start light and work darker? Here's what you want to do. First, you want to start with a large pile of water. Because if we want to make our lightest value, where we want a lot of water, just a little bit of paint. So you could do like I'm doing, where you just take your brush and drop paint. It takes a while. If you happen to have an eyedropper, you could just squeeze and drop a little you could just squeeze and drop a little water onto your palette to make life a little easier for you. Alright, so what I want to do is I want to make sure that my color is hydrated. So get it wet, swirl it around a bit, just so you know the paint is ready to go. And I actually want to clean off my brush because I want to make the lightest value, so I want a lot of water to a little paint. So I'm going to take just a little dot of the paint and mix it into all that water. Just mix it all together and paint it out. As you see, this one ended up being a lighter version than what I did here. If I would have continued this value scale out, I could have gotten this light. Working from light to dark, it is easier to make a lighter value first. Alright, now in order to make my next darker value, I want to add a little bit more paint. So I'm going to get a little more paint on my brush and mix it into that whole pile. And paint that out. Now, if something like this happens where you notice that these two colors are really similar, you could always go back and fix it. Just add a little bit more paint to your brush, mix it in, and paint over the top. Watercolor is nice and forgiving. It lets you fix things before it gets too far. Now, you might say, well, shoot, now this is way too dark for what I wanted. Take a paper towel, blot it up. This helps just get rid of some extra water. And I'm just going to take a wet paintbrush and mix it into all of this. This is adding a little bit more color back into the paint. And I'm spreading it out. That made my nice value for me. And I would just continue this process, adding more paint to my brush, more paint to the water, paint it. Now again, this one, kind of similar, so I'm going to add a little bit more paint to the water and try that one again. And just mix it into it. There we go, that's a bit better. And last one, I want to mix a lot of paint into it. So I'm going to swirl, swirl, swirl. And mix that into the water. Alright, so as you can see, working backwards in a value scale, it's a lot easier to get lighter colors. Whereas if you work from dark to light, it's a lot easier to make darker colors. You can mix, match, and do both. Do what works best for you. It depends on what your project was. Just know if your colors ever get messed up, fix it. It's no big deal. Add more color if you need to, or add more water. Just make sure that you don't ever get any big puddles. If any big puddles happen, just take a paper towel and just touch it to the puddle. You want to soak that up. You don't want any puddles of water left behind on your painting. I also noticed that these two colors were touching each other. So I'm just going to fold my paper towel and touch down in between, help soak up that water. That helps and just makes it so it's not as easy for those two colors to blend together. They still could eventually because it's still slightly wet there, but it's going to be a lot harder. Makes life a whole lot easier. Value is a very useful tool when you're painting. I highly suggest you practice mixing different values first and make sure that you include a lot of them in your paintings. It's going to make your paintings better.